Okay, so what does the problem solution approach actually look like? We did discuss this in round two, but I'm going to do a full overview so you have a good idea as to what this looks like for when you start developing your full sentence outline as well. I'm also going to provide you with the link to a Google Doc that already has the structure of the problem solution approach outlined there for you, so you can feel free to copy that Google Doc and then start outlining using that structure. So, the problem solution approach is going to begin with your introduction, your attention getter, of course, a psychological orientation, which, if you remember, is your statement of your credibility, as well as stating the needs that are the reasons why our audience should listen to this topic. So, establishing their needs right away, and then followed by a thesis and a preview statement. Main point one is going to start off with your main point one statement that says, this is the problem, and establishes why it's a problem, explaining the problem as well as explaining why it's a problem. So even if you think it's pretty clear as to why it might be a problem, just make sure that you are finding good evidence and support to reaffirm why something is a problem. Because a lot of times, even if everyone generally knows why something might be a problem, people have forgotten exactly why. So it's a really good point to stop and say, hey, this is why this is a problem. And then in main point two, we start again with our thesis statement, which is our solution to the problem. Be very specific. Make sure that you are finding good evidence to support why and how the solution actually addresses the problem that you addressed in main point one. And then conclude with your review. And a psychological closure just means that you're kind of going back to reaffirming why this topic is relevant to your audience, and then ending with a strong final comment. So a lot of what we just discussed in terms of logos, ethos, and pathos is going to naturally be woven into the structure of this speech. But remember, keep thinking about how you can satisfy all of those needs of the audience as you're working on developing each of those main points. So this is a contemporary approach, the problem solution approach. The point here is to discuss solutions to a problem. We don't want to ever leave the audience hanging by just kind of sharing a problem and not saying, here's the solution to it. And additionally, a big part of persuasion is really just establishing that something even is wrong to begin with. So, for example, let's say that you want your friends to have dinner with you, but they already had dinner. So, convincing them to have dinner with you might be a big feat here. What might you do? How might you go about this? Well, you could kind of establish that they're missing an opportunity to hang out with you, that you will be sad. So these are the problems that you might pose to them, and then say, well, the solution is just to kind of come and eat with me again. So in this case, you wouldn't be very persuasive if you didn't give them a problem that coming to eat with you again would solve. Maybe another example could be that you want to go to the school board to receive more funding for your music programs, but you can't really convince the board that they should just allocate more money to the music program without sharing why it's a worthwhile cause to actually allocate more money in the budget to the music program. So if we establish problems like, for example, students in the school might have a lower SAT scores in some of the neighboring schools, or maybe there's been an uptick in violence. We can then say that music funding actually solves those things, as studies have found that students who don't have extracurricular music in their lives actually have lower scores, and students that don't have access to extracurricular music programs are often associated with higher rates of violence and juvenile delinquency. And that would be a much stronger argument than just saying music is great for students and we should just allocate more money in the budget to them. So when we think about strategies for persuading our audience, we do want to position our strongest argument first. Your strongest argument, even in the subpoint, should always go first because that's most likely the one that's going to be heard. And we also want to make sure that we clarify our persuasive goals. So what do I mean by clarifying our persuasive goals? Sometimes students are really excited. They're like, I'm going to talk about a really big problem, and there's just lots of ways that you can tackle this problem. But before you build out your speech, you want to make sure that you are consistent in what goal you are trying to have them reach or attain for your speech. So there's 4 typical goals, which is you're trying to get the audience to adopt something, like get them to start doing something, discontinuance, which could be like getting people to stop doing something, continuance, getting people to continue doing something, or deterrence, getting people to not ever even start doing something. So in most cases, many students are pretty successful with keeping to one persuasive goal. However, sometimes people can get mixed up in between in the main points, and that's why I like to bring this to your attention. So let's say, for example, that you want people to start exercising. Maybe you're going to ask people to exercise 3 times a week. But then somewhere in the middle of it, you're looking in the audience and you're like, I think a lot of people actually are already pretty active. So you say something like, so it'd be great if everyone would just continue doing what they're doing. That would be a persuasive switch, and you want to make sure that you are actually staying with the persuasive goal that you have from beginning to end. So we don't want to confuse the audience by asking them to do something, but then switching to, well, maybe you should just continue it, or asking them to do something and then saying, well, maybe you should stop doing something. You want to make sure that you actually stick with one goal, and that becomes your framework. So same thing with maybe I want my audience to drink more water, and then halfway through I say something like, so stop drinking soda. That would be an example of like a persuasive goal switch. And you're asking then your audience to actually do 2 different things, not just focusing on one thing. So we want you want your goal, your speech to be specific and to stay on its specific goal.